In 1999, Busch Gardens Tampa would open Gwazi, the southeast's largest dual-track wooden coaster at the time. Over time, though, time was not kind to the beastly Woodies, and in 2015, it would close permanently and sit abandoned. 7 years later, it would be transformed into a new legendary beast. But how did a massive two-sided wooden coaster become a single-sided hybrid coaster? Let's travel back in time to hear the story from Gwazi to Iron Gwazi.
Beautiful Busch Gardens Tampa, a delightfully different kind of family entertainment.
When Busch Gardens Tampa opened in 1959, it was nothing like it is today. Back then, all there was a brewery and a bird garden. This makes sense as Busch Gardens originally opened under Anheuser-Busch, the company that made beers such as Budweiser and Bud Light. That was until 1965, when the company decided to add the Serengeti Plains exhibit, increasing the number of animals in the park. Along with this expansion, a monorail was added to the park to allow guests better views of the animals. Busch Gardens would be successful for the company. That was until 1971, when the Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom opened its doors. The opening of this resort would cause huge competition with the park. To compete, Busch Gardens would add a series of investments starting in the 1970s. The first of these additions would come in 1973. That was the year when the Stanley Falls Flume opened. This aerodynamics log flume was popular amongst families, as something like this had never been seen before in the state of Florida. The expansion would only continue throughout the years, with rides such as Python in 1976 and Scorpion in 1980. Continuous additions like this boost Busch Gardens to what it is today, but one addition they added in the 1990s was a troubled mess. During the 1990s, competition within the Florida market became increasingly competitive. This was especially problematic for Busch Gardens Tampa in the year 1999. That year, the Walt Disney World Resort was opening 2 new rides. At Epcot, Test Track was finally going to open after a long 2-year delay. Hollywood Studios at the same time was adding Rock and Roller Coaster, a Vekoma launched looping coaster similar to the premier ride Spaghetti Bowl coasters, plus with Aerosmith theming. Meanwhile, Universal Studios down the road was preparing to open Islands of Adventure, a theme park that combines world-class rides with immersive theming. Busch Gardens knew if they wanted to stay relevant, they needed to build a ride unique to them from the surrounding competition. Their solution was a massive wooden coaster, as they are few and far between in the state of Florida. And the fact that Anheuser-Busch has experience with wood coasters from the Florida Hurricane at the defunct Boardwalk in baseball. Not only that, but there would be 2 roller coasters running against one another. Busch Gardens knew they either have to go big or go home, especially since over at Universal Studios, one of Islands of Adventure's opening day rides would be Dueling Dragons, a pair of B&M inverts running against each other, having near-miss elements with the other track to give it a unique experience. With this in mind, Busch Gardens Tampa would look into a newcomer in the industry. In the small town of Westchester, Ohio, the roller coaster company Custom Coasters International will go through a bit of a transformation. 2 of its employees, Claire Hay and Michael Broodley, decided to leave CCI and form their own. This will be called Great Coasters International, or GCI for short. The purpose of GCI is to create new and revolutionizing ideas and implement them on wooden coasters. Having worked for CCI, the duo has experience with wood coasters and carpentry, as the prior year in 1993, they would help build Outlaw at Adventureland. Right away, after assembling the company in 1994, they would reach out to Hershey Park to help on new projects. 2 years later, the company would construct their first coaster, Wildcat at Hershey Park. This coaster would be revolutionary, as elements like those on Wildcat have never been seen in quite a while. Wildcat also features many of GCI's now iconic elements, such as the twisted drop. Wildcat's twister-style layout is what GCI's layout would become known for. GCI would continue to build new wooden coasters. In 1998, they constructed Roar for Six Flags America, and a year later, Roar for Six Flags Marine World. These three coasters would convince Anheuser-Busch to contact Great Coasters International to construct their newest innovation. When construction started, the coaster would use 1 million boards of 2x12 planks of wood that are bent and twisted with clamps. It would also use 2 million bolts and millions of nails. The wood used to build Gwazi would be pressure-treated southern yellow pine from a tree farm in South Carolina, baked in a kiln to be both bug, fire, and rot resistant. The ride was designed to withstand strong hurricane and wind forces. Maintenance workers would also walk the track daily to check for loose bolts. This was minimized with the use of specialized locking bolts that would not be affected when the lumber shrunk in the scorching Florida sun. These bolts provide less of a chance for the nuts and bolts to loosen from vibrations. All of these dynamics would come together to form the Gwazi that would open on June 18, 1999. When it opened, it was designed with a 48-inch height requirement, as the park wanted this to be a ride more to the families in comparison to the massive steel coasters such as Monte. Guests raved the coaster for its unique and unpredictable layout, as the two coasters were designed to intertwine with the other track to create a mess of wood. This had an added effect of riders being confused and disoriented about what just happened. The ride consists of two sides, lion and tiger. Both tracks would have slightly different layouts and mirror each other. When both tracks left the station, they would turn in the opposite direction and climb a 105-foot lift hill. One thing that guests remember is the dueling interaction, as you would have with the sensation of almost colliding with the other train. Both sides would go through a series of drops, airtime pops, and turns at 53 miles per hour, all while dueling with the other train, completing the 3,508-foot journey. In the ride's opening year, reports stated that guests had positive feedback for the attraction. For being one of the first coasters by GCI, they did a good job at it. Guests stated that they have experienced great airtime and took their breath away. Some even called it the best wood coaster, all while being fast and smooth. The coaster would continue to operate for the next decade. However, problems arose in regards to the ride's maintenance and roughness. One issue causing this is the location in West Central Florida. The heat, combined with the high humidity and natural disasters, caused Gwazi to have a failing structure. The other issue is with the ride's trains. Unlike most coasters from GCI that use their own Millennium Flyers, Gwazi uses PTC trains, common on most wood coasters. While those trains work great on rides such as Blue Streak at Cedar Point and the Beast at Kings Island, these trains were not exactly designed to handle the twisted layouts of GCI's. Both these problems caused Gwazi to have higher maintenance costs and drop in popularity very quickly. Busch Gardens tried various ways to fix the ride, such as numerous retracts in the late 2000s and even replacing the PTC trains with new Millennium Flyers in 2011. The funny thing about this is that when Gwazi originally opened in 1999, Busch Gardens was offered to test out GCI's new Millennium Flyers. Busch Gardens requested to use PTC trains instead, as the new Millennium Flyers weren't proven technology yet. Interestingly enough, Six Flags decided to risk it and use the trains on Discovery Kingdom's Roar. However, these were just band-aids to the ride and wasn't enough to fix Gwazi, and it remained unpopular amongst pretty much everyone. With the rising maintenance costs and decreasing ridership, Busch Gardens Tampa decided to close the Tiger side in 2012, 1 year after receiving the new trains. But just like Dueling Dragons, the coaster lost all its magic once it stopped dueling. Busch Gardens would continue to operate the Lion side for a few years, but the roughness and structural issues got the better of them, as the coaster was reaching its breaking point. Busch Gardens had no other option but to announce Gwazi's closure. The park stated the closure was not just due to roughness and low ridership, but also due to wood rot and a failing structure. The final riders would challenge the Beast on February 1st, 2015. Now, unless a ride randomly closes, normally when a ride operates for the final time, demolition begins right afterwards. However, Gwazi would instead be left sitting abandoned on the property. It's unknown why Busch left it sitting there, but there were speculations. One rumor suggests that Busch Gardens wanted to remove Gwazi, but had no plans to replace it. Another more widely viewed option is that the SeaWorld chain, who owns Busch Gardens, was going through some money problems at the time due to backlash in regards to how they treat their animals following the release of the Blackfish documentary. Either way, Gwazi would continue to stay dormant until 2019, when a new savior would arrive. Around the same time Busch Gardens tried to fix Gwazi the first time, a new manufacturer would burst onto the coaster scene in Rocky Mountain Construction. This company would get their start initially working for some of Silverwood's projects. Just a few years later, they would be contacted by Six Flags to convert Six Flags Over Texas Texas Giant into a steel hybrid coaster. This new conversion would be called New Texas Giant. RMC transformed an old, rough, outdated wooden coaster into a smooth, airtime-filled ride that everyone loved, replacing bland, boring elements with new, exciting ones. From there, RMC would continue to make these conversions from rough wooden coasters, such as the Rattler, Fiesta Texas, and Mean Streak at Cedar Point. Enthusiasts hoped that Busch Gardens Tampa would give Gwazi the RMC treatment. But that wasn't until 2018 when fans would get some news. That year, the park announced Tigress, a premier ride Skyrocket 2 clone. At the same time though, the park also teased of a new attraction to replace Gwazi. Fans immediately knew that they would finally get RMC Gwazi. More evidence started to appear around Gwazi's replacement, such as deconstruction of the wooden supports and even a trademark for the name Iron Gwazi. Then in September 2019, enthusiasts got the announcement they've been wanting to hear.
What's that?
The wait is over. Something's coming. You've been waiting.
All waiting. The wait is over.
The wait is over.
The wait is over.
Because the structure of Gwazi was in terrible condition, RMC would only use 10% of the old structure and 75% of the footers, while the rest would be new RMC wood. The ride would be the tallest, fastest, and steepest hybrid in the world. With a height of 206 feet and top speed of 76 miles per hour, this ride took the record from Steel Vengeance. Hype grew for Iron Gwazi as the park continued construction, testing, and even revealing the trains during IAAPA 2019. The ride was marching towards a March 2020 opening, but we all know what happened that month. The COVID-19 pandemic. This virus pretty much wrecked the entire economy, but it especially damaged the theme park industry. Every park had to stay closed for months due to safety concerns regarding the pandemic. When Busch Gardens Tampa reopened following the shutdown, it was hard for them to adapt. All the parks were losing so much money and they all had to cut corners somewhere. One way was to delay their new for 2020 attractions. So for Busch Gardens, they decided to delay the opening of Iron Gwazi to spring of 2021. Or at least that's what they said. Spring 2021 came and went, and yet Iron Gwazi was still not open. Later, the park changed Iron Gwazi's ride page on their website from Spring 2021 to Anticipated 2021. That change was not a good sign, and SeaWorld ultimately delayed it, along with all their other rides not named Texas Stingray until 2022. It's unknown why they delayed it again, but fortunately SeaWorld finally announced the opening day for Iron Gwazi to be March 11, 2022, with pass holder preview starting in February. When the ride finally opened, just in time for spring break, guests could not believe how insane the experience was. With strong ejector-filled airtime, this coaster became a world-class addition to Busch Gardens Tampa, and it quickly became an icon. The ride instantly became a top 10 roller coaster around the world and a ride worth remembering. The ride experience went like this. The ride exits the station and immediately turns left, then makes a small dip down to the left and went up the massive 206-foot lift hill. The lift is pretty intimidating since it uses RMC steel truss lift system. That means the lift looks like it doesn't have enough supports even though it's strong enough to hold the lift up together. Once at the top, you slowly crest the 91-degree drop and maxing out at 76 miles per hour. The first element after the drop is the ride's outer banked airtime hill similar to the one on Steel Vengeance. Except on here, the banking doesn't occur until the apex of the element. Following this, Iron Gwazi heads uphill to the right for the ride's famous element, the death roll. Named after a crocodile maneuver, this is essentially one of RMC's barrel roll down drops. Except you enter this element with a full head of speed. This causes the element to apply different forces than the other barrel roll down drops that RMC has created so far. After this comes an overbanked curve that reuses the supports of Lionside's lift hill. It's worth noting that prior to this conversion, previous RMC conversions mostly followed the same layouts as their predecessors. On Iron Gwazi, it takes a much more unique layout than the previous Gwazi right out of the get-go. After the overbank comes many riders' favorite element on the ride, the twist and shout. If you're unaware of this element, think of the wave turn on Velocicoaster but banked in the opposite direction. This element is favored by many for its strong, sustained, sideways ejector airtime. After this comes a turn that consists of half a camelback, a wave turn, and a 0G stall. Following this maneuver comes a hill that is banked to the right to head into a trick track before turning to the right again for one last element. A small, sustained ejector drop into the brakes with a full head of steam. Gwazi is relentless and intense, never giving a moment for riders to catch their breath. And it does so while having great pacing, never slowing down until it hits the brakes. This strong pacing is how Gwazi delivers such strong forces and will forever remain in the minds of riders who challenge this beast. While the original Gwazi may be gone, Gwazi will continue to honor the legacy in steel form, and we can thank GCI for their amazing work. But whatever happened to GCI? Despite their early stages, they steadily improved their design and building technique to become a top-tier wooden coaster manufacturer, creating awesome rides like Renegade at Valley Fair, Gold Striker at California's Great America, and Mystic Timbers at Kings Island. SeaWorld would even continue to work with GCI for 2 other projects, Invader at Busch Gardens Williamsburg and the previously mentioned Texas Stingray at SeaWorld San Antonio. The same would apply to RMC, as they had and have turned old crappy wooden coasters into smooth steel coasters and building their own ground-up creations. Most notably Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point, Zadra at Energylandia, and Lightning Rod at Dollywood, making them one of the best coaster manufacturers on the planet. While Gwazi is now an elite attraction for Busch Gardens Tampa, we all can't forget the once all-wooden beast that once stood in its place. Long live the Gwazi. Thank you all so much for watching this video. This is the first in a brand new series where we dive into roller coasters and other amusement rides history and dynamics. Please give me a like and consider subscribing. That way it motivates me to create more awesome content just like this in the future. This is the Coaster Flood, riding out.